Hey, one more thing before you go. Growing up after World War II in a small southern town, struggling with the patriarchy, an anxious mother, panic attacks, artist block, and finding a husband who would support her twin passions of raising children and having a career. A doomed romance with a dashing French man, participation in guerrilla tactics to preserve historic buildings in Raleigh, North Carolina, physical moving and renovating a historic house. We're going to have a conversation with the author of the memoir, The Book of Ruth, Taming Ghost and Saving History, which narrates 50 years of saving historic places in North Carolina, creating art, raising two kids, to adulthood, and ultimately finding the right partner. I'm your host, Michael Herst. This is One More Thing Before You Go, and welcome to Over the Teacup Sunday. My guest in this episode struggled between a career that demanded a good deal of travel to document historic buildings and landscapes and acute anxiety triggered by that travel. Ruth Little's life as a child, adult, and professional woman involved investigating and battling ghosts. As a historic preservationist, which I'm really excited about getting into learning more about that, she explored North Carolina's past, making new discoveries and fighting to preserve physical evidence that otherwise would have been destroyed and lost. At the same time, she was dealing with her own ghost and self preservation. She grew up with a mentally ill mother and grappled with their relationship until she died. At age 21, she suffered her first panic attack, which felt like a near death experience. These attacks, which Ruth kept secret, continued to plague her for decades, nearly every time she traveled. She created a memoir as a record of what it was like to be a professional woman and artist when such pursuits were actively discouraged. Her story includes a doomed romance with a dashing Frenchman, her participation in guerrilla tactics to preserve historic buildings in Raleigh, North Carolina, well done, and physically moving and renovating a historic house, as many more ups and downs as she pursued her passion for preservation while the field of, of historic preservation was still very young. We're going to have a conversation with Ruth about that amazing journey that is still going on and how you too can be inspired to create your own journey. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Michael.
How are
Great
you?
introduction.
Thank you very much. Um, I uh, I really, as I said earlier before we started, I really appreciate what you do. I think that preserving history is an amazing opportunity to pass it on to everybody else in the younger generation and those who don't have the opportunity to stop and take a look, because sometimes we don't do that. And where you've come from and how you got here. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
I always like to start in the beginning. So, as I said, this is kind of this is your life in a different form. So, let's start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We called it Vietnam because Fort Bragg Air Force Army Base is right next door, largest Army base in the world. And I grew up during the Vietnam War era.
So, what was your family like?
Uh, Typical nuclear family. My father was a land surveyor. My mother was a school teacher. And I have one brother and a middle class, very Southern, very conservative, very crazy.
I would imagine. I think we've all got a little bit of that in our families. Families are unique, aren't they?
Yeah.
We all hold our secrets, and sometimes they're out on our sleeves. Um, so you've got you have siblings, and the siblings still live in the South
One
in
brother.
the Carolina
Right.
region.
Right. And my my mother's family came into North Carolina in the 1600s,
Wow.
and my father's family came into the mountains of North Carolina in the 1700s. So there, I just grew up in this vast tribe, eastern North Carolina and western North Carolina, and cousins out the wazoo, and just feeling like this is my state for 300 years.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, from genetic perspective, that's like amazing to be able to take that all the way back that many years. That's not
It
all of us
is.
have that opportunity for that. That's
No,
pretty
I know
cool.
many of my friends whose grandparents immigrated through Ellis Island, or great grandparents, and don't even know they can't even get back before Ellis Island. So for
Yeah,
me to get back 300 years is truly uh,
that's a gift.
fascinating. I
Yeah.
guess that's why I'm a historian.
Oh, yeah, it's a gift. I mean, that's the amazing gift. Even with my own journey, I can tell you my grandparents on my great would be great grandfather. I can't even find out where he came from. It stops right there.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's an amazing gift actually. So you and I kind of grew up kind of in the same era. We were close. I know that you said that in the material that you had sent to me when we were talking about your family and how that was, you grew up with a mentally ill mother, correct?
Correct.
What was that like?
It was stressful because she was so anxious that uh, a lot of that anxiety got dumped on me. I was the older and had a little brother, and I felt like I was always protecting him and myself from her. She didn't feel like it didn't feel like it wasn't the normal mother daughter relationship. It was like, who's the adult in the room?
I been there, done that. I think that unfortunately, I think that I grew up with two alcoholic parents, and I think that of that age group, I'm finding, at least through a lot of my interviews and a lot of my conversations with people, that that era of individuals, there seems to be a lot of this type of thing, whether it be alcoholism and or some mental illness and things like that, that um, we are more aware of because of the day and age. I think the educational system and the media has made us more aware of what mental illness actually is, as well as alcoholism and things like that. So, does she have any? Were there any other issues that presented themselves? Would you have any alcoholism or anything like that?
Oh, no, they were pretty much teetotalers, and they passed along really good genetics to me, with the exception of the anxiety that I got from my mother. And its only manifestation are the panic attacks that developed at the age of 21.
So um, you grew up in that area. Did you go to college?
Went to college, couldn't wait to get out of my little southern hometown and go to college, and aspired to go to college out of North Carolina, but I wound up going to a finishing school because I could not get into the University of North Carolina because they didn't take under freshman and sophomore women. So I had to go to a girls' school, which was supposed to be a finishing school. I was supposed to find a husband and settle down, but then I went on to the university and finished there, went straight on to get a master's, and waited another about 8 years later. I went back and finished a PhD.
So wait, what did you want to be? Basically, would you go to college for? What'd you go to university for?
I went to the university to. I thought that I considered myself to have been born an artist. I was always the kid who got excused from class in elementary school or middle school to go to the back of the room and paint a mural for whatever season it was or the holiday. But then in college, at the university as a junior, the the modernist movement, abstract art, I got into an art class where I was painting reality, and I was ridiculed for painting, not painting in an abstract modern way, which of course made me do an about turn. Because I loved art so much, I decided, okay, if I'm not a real artist, then I'll be an art historian. I'll study other people's art.
it's sad when that takes place. As we had this right before we started talking, I have a love of art, all forms of it, and art is subjective. Each individual that looks at that art, as you and I both know, can get something different out of the art that we look at. I think that's really too bad that somebody stifled you in that regard, but that didn't stop you because I've seen some of your artwork that you have on your website, and you're a brilliant artist.
It gave me an artist block for uh, about 40 years. And it's part of the patriarchy because I talk in my book about what it was to get to the university and encounter all these male authority figures and to be told that, yes, we'll let you into graduate school and this was for my PhD, but don't expect to have a professional career, to be a professor, because most women, colleges don't hire women.
That's disappointing. What may I ask what time era that was?
That would have been actually 1978, so fairly
Mm.
recently.
Yeah, that's not too
But
long ago.
this is the South.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I think that especially somebody with your talent. That again, that I'm not seeing it in person, but I have looked at your artwork on your website, and you're a brilliant artist, and I think that that's just too bad. But you have overcome that, and you have come through on a very positive note with being able to create art as well as to express it in many different ways. How did you become a historic? How did you get involved in the historic preservation and history?
I, my mother loved history, loved antiques, collected everything she could, and eventually that I came to understand that she was a hoarder and collected everybody else's photographs, all the photographs from all the family members on both sides of my family. And so I think I watched her and I rejected a lot of what she represented, but not her love of history. And she dragged us all over North Carolina to see the houses of famous people, Carl Sandburg, other authors, um, historic Williamsburg. We did a lot of that in my youth, and it imprinted on me. But then it wasn't. I was going to just major in art history rather than architectural history, historic preservation, until I got to graduate school and I encountered Professor William Geordie, who gave us it was a class in American architecture, and our first homework assignment was to take a brown paper bag and kind of open it up and a pencil and go into downtown Providence, Rhode Island, where I was in graduate school at Brown, and to take a block of buildings in downtown Providence and draw a picture of them and write a story about these buildings. And there I was doing the first field work of my whole life for architectural history at that point, I was about 22 and talking to the people. They were commercial buildings. I was talking to the shopkeepers and drawing the buildings and finding out what they knew about the history of the buildings. And I felt like it wasn't even work. It wasn't even homework. This was sheer joy. And that I had finally found what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
That's a brilliant professor to take that perspective and to embark people on that journey because it allows them to open up their minds to more than just the book. Experience the world and touch it and feel it and listen to it and experience it. That's pretty cool.
So that was I finished that degree in 1970, and in 1971 I got my first job in my profession at the State Historic Preservation Office in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was the second year it had been in existence, and I my mission, if I wanted to accept it, was to save historic landmarks in North Carolina, where I had so many contacts and so many relatives and all over the state. And I just took it and ran, traveled all over the state in a state car, with my clipboard and my camera and my curiosity.
That's amazing. Now, coming from with obviously all of your relatives and kin kin were all from that area. What did they think of that?
By that point, I was an adult, and I, I, I don't know. I didn't see them very much anymore.
Hmm.
But I always, when I would go somewhere, particularly somewhere where I was doing surveys for part of what I did after I left state government is to be a, a consultant. I established my own business, and I had to go out and tell people who were in the pathway of a new airport or a new highway, some kind of federal project. I had to tell them that I was surveying for the route of a new highway or a new airport, and they understood that what I was doing was going to threaten their whole existence. But they would say to me, "Well, who are you?" And I would tell them, depending on where I was. If I was in Eastern North Carolina, I would tell them about my aunt who lived in a town nearby who had been a school teacher. If I was in Western North Carolina, I would tell them about my grandfather who had been a doctor in Boone in the mountains. And instantly they would realize that I was one of them. I was not an unfeeling state bureaucrat. And so then I could do the work I needed to do, and they knew that I was going to represent them.
That was very convenient. That worked out really well, didn't it?
Much better. I was a good field worker because I could relate to everybody.
It's always nice. It's always not in any environment you go into. It really makes it more beneficial when you can relate to somebody and empathize and understand from that perspective. So that's pretty select, actually. I know you tell me about you went to France at one point to study, didn't you?
I did. My It was actually in my senior year of college at the University of North Carolina, and I had the chance to be in the year abroad program in Lyon, France, and it was the first time I had left. I hadn't done even much traveling in the United States, barely gotten out of North Carolina. So there I was in France at the age of 21 for a year, learning the language, uh, traveling all over. We just took groups of us got on trains, and sometimes we hitchhiked and traveled all over Western Europe and even a little bit into Eastern Europe. Barely went to college at all, but we learned a lot of French. And in every single way, instead of being a Southern Baptist uh, pro- provincial little girl, I became a sophisticated citizen of the world.
Yeah, that's an amazing journey. I love France. France is, especially for the historical perspective of France, and what a good reason to play hooky from school.
That's what it was all about. It
That's
was an
good.
education of the world.
Oh yeah, well yeah, in the history. I mean that again. We mentioned this before we started. My wife and I love history. That's one thing we do have in common with our marriage, and we're very lucky for that. Is that we both have a passion for history, and we study everything that we have the opportunity to learn about the history of France, the history of England, the history. I mean, not just what's on what is it? And I'm probably going to mess this up. The Crown or any or Bridgerton or anything like that. I mean, we go into the actual history of these things, and we've been married. Well, this year is 33 years, and we've been lucky enough to have that connection between us that we both love that kind of history, and we because of some COVID and some other situations, we haven't had the opportunity to go out and walk in history like we've wanted to, but you have. So, that experience within itself, as you started to become the historic preservationist, let's talk about that journey. How did you evolve into that?
Well, my graduate degree is in art history and architectural history, and the way to I was like a public historian, And so a public historian is trying to save history in a public way. My way was to uh, study old buildings and, when appropriate, either create historic districts so that they could be, for example, like the oldest blocks in an urban area, a downtown, or a particularly important neighborhood, or individual very old farmsteads, factory buildings, old factory buildings. I've put, I've, I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of National Register nominations and local historic landmark designations that have saved buildings and neighborhoods and parts of downtowns and parts of the countryside that would have been lost.
Well, that within itself, I think, would be very self-satisfying in regard to, because you're contributing back to society in such a way that that lives on, and it doesn't get destroyed. So, from that perspective, I think part of your book, um, you talk about that journey in becoming that preservationist and what you do and how you do it. Because I know you've written some other books in regard to specifics that you've worked with, correct?
Yeah, I don't. To me, if I have built up a great deal of information and understanding of something artistic or historical, then I am I am being derelict if I don't put it into writing so I can share it with other people. For example, when I wrote my doctoral dissertation at the University of North Carolina, I chose graveyards, gravestones, because I had made a vow to myself to protect, at least document old graveyards in North Carolina, because I had seen them being destroyed by developers who wanted, just in the middle of the night, just bulldozed.
Really?
So I had found this incredible grave marker in 1974 that was from the 1700s in a family graveyard down on the Cape Fear River near where I grew up. And I didn't take a picture of it because I was there to do the architecture, the old farmhouse. And I went back 2 weeks later to document that grave marker, and it was gone. It
Wow.
had been taken out of the graveyard, and it was an incredible relic of these were Highland Scots that had come into that river valley up the Cape Fear River in the 1700s. And that was one of the grave markers that they had created. So it was priceless, and it was gone. And so I said, okay, one day when I get the chance, I'm going to go around all over North Carolina, and I'm going to at least get photographs and documentation so they're not, so that people know about these amazing uh, burial monuments that reflect our early history and our culture. So I did get a chance. I got a 2-year National Endowment for the Humanities grant in graduate school, and I spent that 2 years all over North Carolina documenting gravestones and graveyards. And I created a book that came out of my dissertation called Sticks and Stones: 3 Centuries of North Carolina Grave Markers. And I say grave markers because they're not all stone.
Right.
People made grave markers out of whatever they had. Um, very strong wood like cedar and heart pine would be used for grave markers in the eastern part of the state where there was no stone, and a lot of fieldstone in the western part of the state. And African Americans often used, they made a lot of homemade grave markers because they couldn't afford to buy a gravestone.
Right.
They made them out of concrete, very creative. They placed articles, they would take grandpa's pocket watch and embed it in a concrete headstone that they had
Mm.
made. Seashells were used to mark graveyards. So my book, which came out in 1998, published by the University of North Carolina Press, has I've found people all over the country who want me to sign their copies of the book. It's being used all over the United States.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, I think to think that, and I didn't realize this until you brought that up there. To think that developers would go in the middle of the night and just bulldoze a graveyard. Never thought that that would take place.
Yeah, a family graveyard, small, and maybe there weren't that many grave markers there, and they whatever they could get away with sometimes.
Wow, that's too bad. I mean, what a shame. But brilliant that you had that opportunity to go and create that environment for that to live on from that
Yeah,
perspective. I
yeah,
think that obviously with my title, One More Thing Before You Go, we talk a lot about death and dying and honoring that in those forms, and that in itself would be part of that, honoring that. So thank you for doing that. I mean, I don't know anybody in South Carolina. I don't have well,
North,
actually, I do have a relative in South Carolina. My
North.
cousin, or North Carolina, excuse me. Um, my cousins, I have a cousin that lived there. Him and his family. They are in North Carolina at the moment, and he's grew up there. He's a pastor out there and a coach, and works at one of the universities, religious universities over there. But yeah, that's cool. Very, 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 very cool. Very cool. Um, your what what inspired you to write your memoir, your journey and your and how you because you've overcome quite a bit of stuff throughout your life's obstacles, basically that have thrown them. You've had some loss in your life. You had the loss with your parent, with your mother. You've had loss other than that to work your way back around to where you're at today.
At the In 2018, I had been doing almost 50 years of historic preservation. And I thought, and writing the history of so many communities, so many families, so many individual people, architects, etc. And I thought, I'm an antique. I'm old enough to be, I'm history. Why am I not writing about myself? Why am I not using all of this, sharing all of this perspective that I have on the era that I've lived in with future generations? It's just I'm a writer. If I know something, I want to write it down and share it with people. So what I know is that I've had a very blessed life, a very adventurous life. I keep getting back up, and if I get knocked down, I keep getting back up and trying again. And I want to write this all down for my children and young people all over the world.
I know you call it the Book of Ruth, and it is your journey. It is everything. It's a memoir, but it also has uh, a historical preservation built right there within it, at least from your area. What can we learn from that book?
I, to me, it's that uh, uh, the power of looking at things. Because historic preservation, I'm preserving things. I'm preserving buildings or graveyards, historic landscapes. Um, I even get into obviously sculpture with the grave markers. It's people think that you have to research in books to understand art and architecture, but sometimes it's just a matter of looking at it. And I've looked, in fact, my forte is looking at very, very humble um, buildings that people have created, log cabins, traditional farmhouses that never had an architect. They were simply built the way um, everyone in the community built. And people think they're not historic and they're not important, but to me, truly, they're much more important than the Monticellos or the works by great architects because they represent the the beliefs and the culture and the history of ordinary people in the
Mm.
United States. So I think you can learn how to look at these treasures, and in some cases, hopefully, you can protect them and take from them this understanding of the glory that is our past.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's to me coming from an individual that loves history and loves art. And when you have the opportunity to, I think today's day and age, I guess if I present it this way, unfortunately, in today's day and age, and watching development, you had touched on it before about just wiping over people's graves with no respect of who was there and how they got there and why they're there, and moving forward. Sometimes progress forgets about the value of history. And it forgets about the value of where we have come from, more so than what can I build, how big can I build it, and how much money can I make from it. It we forget, and that's a terrible thing, I think, in today's day and age. So preserving that is a key to helping it to live on, in some form or
I,
another.
this last project that I finished up in 2018 was a survey of everything in Raleigh uh, built before 1975. So this was what they call the recent past. I was working from World War II to 1975, so 30 years after World War II. And I got into all of these suburbs that were built during the post World War II boom in Raleigh. And only a very few of them were built for African Americans. They were largely built for middle class white people. And I focused in on these African American suburbs and realized uh, what the story was. African Americans were they didn't have the money to buy property. There were no black developers. And so in the beginning, black developers had to cooperate with white developers to create new places for African American families to live. Even black veterans who fought for us in World War II were cut out of uh, VA loans, FHA loans. They didn't even get the benefits that white veterans got after World War II. And I was able to identify three suburbs from the 1950s and 1960s built for African Americans in Raleigh and get them listed on the National Register. White people in Raleigh didn't even know these neighborhoods existed. They were on the other side of the tracks. But what is so interesting is these suburbs of homes, small homes, are built in mid-century modern style, which was a style that was not popular among white people. White people wanted colonial revival houses that represented the Old South, and black people wanted mid-century modern architecture that did not have any stigma of the past, that they were they were they were looking to the future, not the past.
That's interesting. From that perspective, that's really interesting to see that the different viewpoints from on there. One wants to move forward, and the others want to stay stuck in the past.
And that's the South right there. That's the
Mhm.
essence of the lost cause. The golden era of the South was before the Civil War.
Well, I have to say that's disappointing from that perspective. I think that uh, that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm glad that you were able to kind of achieve that opportunity to showcase that area and to showcase what was about to be lost, and kind of move that forward. Um, I know you have married somebody that you went to school with history, or was also a history major as well.
Alas, I've had two marriages, and I'm now in my third and final wonderful relationship. And in this relationship, I have a partner who loves what I do, and would never let me go out on a project out in the field without him being there because he loves it so much.
That's a positive. Especially in this day and age. So kudos, congratulations for that. I'm glad that you met some one, and that you're living the life to the fullest, and that it's going in the direction it's supposed to, and you're able to pass that on to others. So very nice. Um, I was going to ask you if he went on any of your little journeys or any of your excursions, but you kind of just answered that. That's got to make you feel really good too.
Well, writing the memoir taught me so much about myself. I think all of us, as the years, the decades go on, there are things that we think we failed at. If we could look back, we'd say, "Oh, I shouldn't have, I got, I shouldn't have given up the opportunity to take that new PhD that I got in the early 1980s and go out and teach architectural history and historic preservation." But I was not able to do that because I married at the same time that I was getting the PhD, and his career kept him from leaving Raleigh, and there were no jobs in Raleigh. And so I coped by, I sold real estate for a while. I wrote some books and went back to work for state government. And I always regret, I don't regret our two wonderful children, but I did regret the chance to have had that. I felt like I would have been able to influence many more people if I had had a teaching career rather than a documentation career. And then I realized as I was writing the book and looking at all this, all the young people that I hired to help me go out and document old buildings, and all of the articles that I've written, all of the organizations that I've helped to found, all of the books that I've published. If I had been a professor, I couldn't have done any more than I already did, kind of as an independent scholar. And so I realized I can let that failure go. It wasn't a failure at all. It was what was meant to be.
Well, life always puts us on the path I think that we're supposed to be. Sometimes we have some obstacles that get put in the way, but those obstacles we either overcome them, which you have 100%, and or we always allow them to set us back. But in your case, you moved it forward and you've progressed and you continue to preserve. I think you have renovated and saved some houses of your own during this journey, haven't you?
Oh, many. I just love old buildings, and I'm a rescuer. And I think that comes from my mother, who would she bought a lot of old furniture that needed to be repaired, but because the thrill was in the acquisition and
Mm.
not the restoration, she never restored them. So I'm the restorer, and I love to restore old buildings. And the most amazing restoration that I did was to buy the second oldest house, 1775 house, a plantation house in outside of Raleigh that had to be moved or it was going to be destroyed for an office building. And I bought it for $1 because it had to be moved. Absolutely beautiful, well preserved house. So I moved it 15 miles to a very suitable location with a lot of big oak trees and restored it and lived in it and wrote a book about it. It's called Carolina Cottage, uh, a personal history of the Piazza House, because this small house, 1.5 story house from 1775, has an amazing front porch that swoops out. The main roof of the house creates the porch. It's an engaged cottage type of house, which was very popular in the Deep South because of the extreme heat. And I am so proud of saving that house. And my book, Carolina Cottage, is all about that house and all the other houses of this type, which are not, they don't have the big columns. They're not prestigious houses. They're not classical revival. They're very vernacular. They were built for the climate. They're strictly utilitarian. And people don't, they look at them and they don't realize just how significant they are for the South.
But you do. So that's a
Oh, yeah.
fantastic opportunity to help I think that doing that kind of work and preserving those kind of situations, those kind of houses, and in that history, it's just a wonderful thing. I know I keep saying it, but I can see it. Like when you talk about it, your face lights up. For those listening to the podcast, your face lights up. You can tell that it is a passion of yours, and I think that passion expounds itself within your books and within the Book of Ruth, because you exude passion with it.
I what a gift passion is. I wish passion for everyone, and just for everyone to find that thing in life that is their passion, and be able to do it as a career.
Yeah, so I think life would be much better if we all got the opportunity to follow our passions and make a living at it. Do you? Uh, let me see one second here. I had a question, and then the question kind of disappeared. Speaking of history, it is now history. um, Let me start here. So, did you ever get the opportunity to teach?
I've taught many at 7 or 8 institutions, all the way from universities to technical institutes as part-time adjunct, never on a tenure track. So in some ways, I'm happy that most of my career was as an independent scholar, because I'm a pretty cussed independent person. And I like to be able to identify what needs to be done and go ahead and do it and not have to work with a committee.
That yeah, that works. The red tape always seems to stand in our way of progress. So that's a good way of approaching it. Um, so let's talk about the Book of Ruth and how somebody can find it and get it, and about your brilliant art, which I've got a little piece that I've shown of some of your art. But where can we find you?
Well, my website, which has my historic preservation and my artwork, is ruthlittle.com. And if you'd like a copy of this book, it's available, of course, on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble, and I'm working on getting it into bookstores in Central North Carolina.
And how about
It's
your other?
also,
I'm sorry.
yeah, the other books. There, the other books are on Amazon and in libraries in North Carolina. Sticks and Stones is in libraries all over the country.
So we can find you at ruthlittle.com. And I can also look at your artwork there, which we're going to talk about in a second here. We can look at your artwork there as well as your books. And I'll make sure that that's in the show notes for you so that everybody has the opportunity to make sure that they can connect with you in one form or another. So you you you've been an artist, correct? You went and you've kind of taken your own path with the artist. You didn't listen to that one professor that not everything had to be abstract. And some of the stuff that you've created is really brilliant. So, um, tell me the feeling you get when you create from the brush perspective.
It's all about color. I am passionate about color, and I get to interpret the real world in all the colors that I love. I don't have to, if I look at a landscape, I'm not going to just paint green and brown and blue. And I get to show people what it is about whatever I'm painting, uh, what it makes, what's so special about it. I found an old type of uh, building on the coast of North Carolina in some old family photographs. These buildings are gone now, but they're called fish houses, and they were built on pilings out in the water for the fishermen to store their crab nets and their trolling nets and all their equipment, and could get to them, and they would, of course, tie their boats up to these fish houses. And I created a series of paintings, fish house paintings, which using magical colors and sort of magic realism to show people what these buildings that are gone now, to bring them back, at least in my paintings, so that people could see what early 20th century, late 19th century North Carolina looked like. And people just were transported by these. And sometimes I have boats in the paintings, and there are mermaids frolicking in the boats.
Well, you got to have mermaids. Have to.
Got to have mermaids.
Have to
All
have
that
mermaids.
water. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. And obviously, so now you are, in my opinion, you're living a very, very full life of purpose because of everything that you've accomplished between your preservation, your work with preserving history in such a way that we can all experience it, and you become an artist that makes you happy, and you can then pass that on to make other people happy.
Yeah.
So
And I do. I hope that this will inspire people to never, ever give up on their passions and what they dreamed of doing when they were young. Don't ever give up on those dreams.
So we can use the Book of Ruth as a guidebook to understand our own journey and then create our own journey to the same path you took.
I hope so.
Very
That was
good.
the idea.
Ruth, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. This is one more thing before you go. Do you have any words of wisdom for anyone out there that is aspiring to follow in your footsteps?
Don't listen to the negativity that you got when you were young. Don't listen to people who tell you that you can't be a writer and an artist. And I got told that many times. You can't do both. You have to choose. No one knows what you're capable of doing until you do it.
Brilliant words of wisdom. Thank you very much for sharing those. Ruth, it's been an amazing journey. Thank you for sharing it with us. I'll make sure that everything is in the show notes so that anyone looking to find you, your book, and your artwork can find you on the web. And thank you again for joining me.
Thank you, Michael. This has been a joy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. That's beforeyougopodcast.com. Tell your story, share your expertise, contribute to the blog, and subscribe to the newsletter. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
And one more thing before you go. Have a nice day, have a nice week, and thanks for listening.
One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life podcast, is a creation of One More Thing Productions, established 2010, all rights reserved.